for the high school students. We had a Library of Congress Veterans History Program study where we interviewed veterans from our area.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. The students did. And then they submitted paperwork to the Library of Congress.
Wow.
I'm going to move over to that chair so that you're not
Yeah, let me-
looking over at me
Yeah.
and, looking off camera. And
Oh.
That'll, because you'll be trying to talk to both of us and they'll be like, well,
Yeah.
what's he looking? Yeah.
Okay.
I also write poetry too.
You write poetry?
And I got, oh yeah, I have several poetry awards.
Oh, wow.
Library
Actually, I
of
think I
Poetry.
did read that in here.
Yeah. I want to see that. These are the poems that they recognized me for. I can give you that.
All right, great, thank you.
And there was a golden poet, silver poet. I did a lot. Oh, here's another one. Here's a couple copies. So, I'm a writer, a publisher. I've done a lot of studies for the National Security Agency as a consultant. A lot of different things. So.
Okay, I've done a lot of different things.
Yes. I get more stuff, I guess. But that's,
Very nice. All right.
Yes.
So first thing I'll have you do is
Yep.
just state your name.
okay. Ronald E. Sakonyi.
Okay. And what else were you having him state, Jim?
Give us your address, current address.
Well, current address is 911 County Route 23, Constantia, New York, 13044.
Okay.
Now, what years when did you enter the service?
I entered the service in 1963, November of 1963. My first day in boot camp was when the assassination of President Kennedy took place.
Wow.
Yes.
What prompted you to join the military?
Well, the first time I was in my second year of college, finishing my second year. I was going to my third year, and I got a draft notice from the Army. And I've been trying to look at the Air Force, and they didn't have what I wanted. So when I got the draft notice, I went to the Navy recruiter. I said, I want to get into electronics. So they had an opening for me, so I went into the Navy. And from there on, it's all history, because I went to electronic technician school. Went to Treasure Island. First I went to San Diego for recruit training. I have pictures of that. And then I went to San Francisco, and from there to Hawaii, where I was not only a technician, but I was a driver and orderly for Rear Admiral Irving, commander of Service Force Pacific Fleet. And while I was there, I applied for Officer Candidate School and was accepted.
Wow.
So I went to Pensacola and went through the BNA school, which is they call the Basic Naval Aviation Officer School, Observer School. And from there I went through that one. I went to Glencoe, Georgia for advanced training, and then from there into the squadron, VQ-1, Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 1, where I was a electronic warfare evaluator. So, of course.
What does that mean?
Say again?
What's an electronic warfare evaluator?
We looked at the signal environment of the enemy. And then we identified locations, what the site was, the entire air defense posture. So when I went to Vietnam, of course, my mission there was to determine what the electronic environment was, and then from there identify where all the threats were. So I'd pick out all the air defense sites based on receivers that we collected, and on photography that we got through radar scope photography, because I was they called a brigand operator. Brigand stands for Bistatic Radar Intelligence Generation Development. It was a new effort, and it showed the terrain around the site of the air defense site. And I was able to back plot to where the actual location was of that air defense site.
Now, where were you stationed at this time?
Da Nang. I went from Japan. VQ-1 was in Japan, and then we flew for 3.5 years out of Da Nang. We would rotate every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and so I flew out of Da Nang. I flew 286 combat support missions. Up north.
286
combat support missions.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was like a year and a half day count flying. And I don't know how many thousands of hours that is, but they're in my logbook, which you have. And our mission was to protect strike forces going in. So we provided MiG warning, we provided surface air missile warnings, and we told them where the AAA concentrations are. And if there is any air activity, we worked it out with the ships where we would call for communication jamming. We jammed the communications between the enemy aircraft and the air defense site. So.
Now, you guys were pretty successful at getting command of the skies.
Yes, we were. We were very successful. Because there are things which I can't really discuss. We were able to define or determine when an enemy aircraft was airborne, and we'd pass that information to the strike aircraft. So they would know, and they would have their CAP, we call it CAP, Combat Air Patrol, that would protect the fighters going in to go after the enemy fighters. So, and we control the air.
Because at the time, these were basically Russian surrogates.
Yes, they were.
You know, the efforts that you guys were involved with were, to a very real extent, sort of a shadow boxing with the Soviet Air Force. You know, who were training these people and giving them, you know, teaching them their tactics. So if the U.S. could, you know, overcome that, that would be, you know, what was your experience?
My experience was that once we identified the site, of course, we alerted, anytime there was a surface air missile site active, we would pass out a warning to all aircraft going in as to where that activity was, that missile activity was. And then at least they would be on guard. We had A6s that would hover around the SAM site, the active SAM site, that would, when the enemy radar turned on their transmitters to identify where the strike force was coming in, they would home onto that radar signal and fire a missile, and they'd blow them up. That we called SAM suppression.
Now, you guys had to be primary targets for them because you were, you know, identifying the sites, sending the information to the attack forces, and they had to know that, you know, you were the primary threat to them.
Yes, we were, when I first started, I was in a Super Constellation. It's an AC-121 mic, configured electronically for the mission. We were unarmed. We had F-4 CAP protecting us in the event an enemy came out across the water. We did have one scare one time where an enemy aircraft, a MiG-17, came out over water below our radar horizon. And they came out underneath. We never saw them. But the F-4 CAP saw them. And before the MiG-17 would fire off his missile, the F-4 fired off his and shot the MiG-17 down. So that was a scare for us. I got a call back to the pilot because I ran the back end, and he'd say, "What the heck are you guys doing back there?" There's an F-17 that was gonna hit us with a belly shot, and you guys missed them. I go, never saw him leave land. You know, he got below our radar scope, and never saw him. So we were lucky. That day we were really lucky.
Because, did many of those get shot down?
Yes, yes, we did. The one thing that, when I was on the carrier, I was on the USS Enterprise after the squadron. I went to Monterey and then to another advanced training course, and then back to the Enterprise, went to the Enterprise, where I was electronic evaluation officer. Again, in support, our task force was engaged in the war in Vietnam. And one of the things that I had to do to justify, the Air Force blamed us for not, when they lost all the B-52s, I don't know if you've seen that in the paper, they lost like, I don't know, 17, 19 B-52s, and they complained to the Navy Department that, hey, you guys didn't protect us, you know, with our jammers to help protect their B-52s. And so the Admiral had me go ahead and put together a study to show, you know, prove that we were on station when we were, and when we jammed, that we were very effective. So I did that, and then we found out the reason why they lost so many. Because they would fly in north of Hanoi, they would bank into the target, which means that as they banked in, all their ECM gear, the jamming gear, was off to the side. And they were exposing themselves. And that's how they lost a lot of them, because they barrage the surface-to-air missiles, and of course you're bound to knock off a couple of them. But they did the same thing. They didn't change their tactics. They kept on banking away, and we proved that. Said, hey, it's your fault. Don't blame the Navy. We had it covered.
Did they learn anything from what your study showed?
Oh, yeah.
Did they change their
I think
tactics because of it?
They did change their tactics.
Did there?
When you lose 19 aircraft, B-52s, you know.
How many people are on a B-52?
I don't know.
It's a pretty big aircraft.
Yeah, I think they had at least 8, probably more. But I don't know the crew configuration. I know on our aircraft we had 32, so on the 121 and the EP3 later, EP3B. We shifted from the 121 to the EP3B, and I was senior evaluator on both of them, as well as on the A3 Sky Warrior. So I flew all 3 aircraft. I liked the 121 was a 4-engine reciprocating engine. The P3 was turboprop. Of course, the A3 was a jet. So I didn't like the A3. I had 3 emergencies. I had 3 emergencies on the A3, and the last one where I was on a mission. I came back. They lost pressurization. We got down to altitude in the Sea of Japan. They got a red light, and which shows that the landing gear wasn't down and locked. They asked us to bail out, and I came to my operators and I said, well, what would you like to do, sir? And they said, sir, whatever you do, you be the first, we'll follow you. Now, at the bottom of the airplane were whip antennas and blade antennas. He dropped to the floor. First one out, we didn't know whether the first guy would clean off the antennas or not. So I thought about it a second. I go, well, I'll call the pilot. I told the pilot, I says, if you guys aren't going to go, I says, I can't see us leaving either. So they phoned the runway and caught us in the net at Sugi. Yeah. So that was exciting.
Yeah, that must have been. So what was how did you happen to find yourself going into the Army?
Into the Army, I was at, when I left the Enterprise, I went to DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. There I worked in the command center. First I worked as an occasions and warning analyst in the watch center, the intelligence center. And I had, of course, the Southeast Asian desk where I kind of monitored the evacuation of Saigon.
What was that like?
It was a panic. They were forcing the people from the countryside into the city. And you could see them. We couldn't fire on innocent people. We knew that, hey, you know, Saigon's got to fall. We got to get everybody out. And we kind of monitored that. They were starting to bring in their missile sites, the air defense missiles, and we figured if we don't get out, we're going to lose a lot of people. So evacuation went out. People tried climbing on helicopters, and
Yep.
you know, we just didn't have the room. I mean, we couldn't get everybody out. It was impossible. But most of our people made it out. Then, of course, the communists took over Saigon. So, but that was.
So what was it like that day?
Well, we knew what was going to happen. Once we saw the push towards Saigon, you know, if we would have attacked the north, you know, we could have won the war. They wouldn't. They just. That war should have been won a long time ago. And they'd call a ceasefire, and we'd go along with it. And they'd just rearm, and it just seemed like it was, they'd doing it on and on again. It just, we weren't making any progress. Corruption, there's probably corruption in the government forces of Saigon. There were too many things that weren't going in our favor, so we had, you know, we just kind of got out of it. But we knew it was coming, and nothing more we can do, you know. You're not going to shoot innocent people. So.
I mean, for someone like yourself who'd been, you know, who had seen that you could get air superiority over the North, and then they wouldn't give, you know, your people the authorization to, you know, whatever, they bomb in the North, you know, and suddenly you'd be accused of escalating the war. Well, it's a war.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, the reason for not attacking the North, one of the reasons they gave was because they thought the Chinese may come into it. It was a lie that they passed on. Because the North Vietnamese and the Chinese were fighting on their border all the time. I don't think the Chinese would have cared whether, you know, if we attacked the North. We were no threat to them. You know, so it was just something that they put out there as propaganda. I saw it as. Because we should have won that war. There's no reason why we couldn't have won it. And just all those loss of lives, military lives, it's just, you know, it was aimless. So, and getting back to DIA, when I came up first time for promotion at DIA for lieutenant commander, I got passed over, which means that if you get passed over twice, then, you know, they voluntarily separate you. What happened was the year before it was 56% promotion, which is no problem. The year I went up, it was 14%, and that's what happened. So I had Admiral Robinson, I had General Farr, kind of worked the paperwork out through with the general in the Army to get me into the Army. And one day I was in the Navy, 30 March, I was in the Navy, 31 March, I was in the Army, on my way to the National Security Agency, where I worked there as a course developer and instructor in electronic warfare.
Now, just to go back, that was when the war was over. They were downsizing the military.
Yep.
they had, dramatically cut the number of positions that were available, which is why only 14% of those, up for promotion could even be considered.
That's
So
true.
The fact that they would want to retain your skills and move you into the National Security Agency certainly speaks to the skills that you had acquired.
Yes.
So what was your role at the National Security? What you can tell us?
Yeah, I was a course instructor and course developer. First, I developed a course that they wanted all the services to attend, and then I taught the course.
So what was the course?
It was based on electronic intelligence, on the different types of signals there were. I'd have tapes. I'd run the tapes and have the students analyze what was on the tape, see if they come up with the right answer, what type of signal it was. And then, they'd write a report, because that's what we did at the end of a mission. We always wrote a report on what we collected. So, and that lasted for it was an 8-week course. So, of course, after that, I went to Germany, because I was there at NSA for a year and a half. Went to Germany in an ASA company, Army Security Agency company, where we monitored the Germans, the Czechs, on the western part of Germany. So, monitored their movements and the Soviet movements on any exercise they did. So we want to know what their capabilities were and how they ran an exercise, what was involved in the exercise, what systems they had, and it worked out. Keeping tabs of the Soviets and the East Germans and the Czechs. It was a good mission. I loved it. You were out in the field, on the border, on a mountaintop, looking over with your collection equipment onto the side of the border. So, and then you'd pass that back, to NSA or to the company or to the division. It was the 1st Armored Division. So,
What efforts were they making to keep you from doing that?
they couldn't. We went out in the open. If you look at the German geographical area, a lot of woods, and along the entire German border, you had the towers, the German towers, and they knew they were collection sites. And I talked to some German officers. They said, "Well," he says, "we'll probably be the first ones to go, because they'll take us right on out." Because they were the ones that really, in their towers, they could see quite a ways into the Czechs and the East Germans, and they could watch the Soviets, what they're doing.
Now, this was the height of the Cold War.
Yes, it was.
And what was going through your head as you looked at whether the day would come when they might come over that border?
Well, being in DIA, I was also an indications and warning analyst. So I knew what the telltale signs were if they were going to jump from an exercise into direct combat. So we always look for those signs, for those indications. So we were pretty much prepared. 1st Armored Division was well prepared because it was a tank division. And we had 1st Cav, we had the cavalry that worked along the border. So that was basically our first line of defense. Once the Cav got there, then you'd have all the other divisions moving. There was a fold the gap scenario that we always monitored, because we felt that when the Russians come across, it's going to be through the fold the gap, and that's what we kind of kept on top of. And there's a few other areas that secondary that we thought they might come. But we had a plan laid out as to how to confront any Soviet invasion of West German territory. So,
Were there any moments when it looked kind of hinky?
no, not at all. I went from, one time I went from from Germany to Berlin, and as you go across the border, you hit the first checkpoint, and they have, checkpoint Charlie I think it was. You come to the first, it's a Soviet checkpoint, and they have the tallest, broadest shoulder Russian at the checkpoint. You had to stop, give them your flag orders that says, you know, you have access to go across the East German highway into Berlin. So you got out of the car, you showed them your flag orders, and they'd have you go into a building. I go into this little building, and I see is like a shelf, not a shelf, but a latch go up, and I see a hand come out. I didn't see the person's face or anything. Hand them the orders, like a couple paragraphs, right? That authorized me to drive to Berlin. The latch would shut, and I'd be waiting there 15, 20 minutes. I said, come on. They're probably taking pictures of me and reading all those, taking copies of the flag orders, taking pictures of the car I was in, just so they could monitor me as I was going along that 2-hour stretch of highway until I got into Berlin. And of course, they probably passed the pictures off to the East Germans and the Russians in Berlin, saying, hey, watch out for this guy. But that's, you know, and he did it coming both ways, so it just, but it made you, you know, made you smile a bit, because what they're trying to project is the power of the Russian army with the big broad shoulders. No, really not that. You know, just what they're trying to project, the image. So
in those days when Berlin was sort of surrounded, sort of an island, what was it like?
Well, let's see. I went from one part of Berlin to the other, and as I was passing through East Germany on the rail system, on the subway system, at the different stops, you had to watch where you got off at. You would see East German guards with machine guns on the shoulder at all the subway stations. You know, and I go, oh wow, I'm glad I don't live here. But we got into Berlin and go, wow, that was great. And of course, we had a meeting with some of our officials, and we talked to them about different topics that was of concern to all of us. And then I headed on back to West German territory.
Now, how did it come about that you were dealing with the Saudis?
The Saudis, that was good too, because when I retired from the service, I worked for Syracuse Research Associates of Syracuse Research Corporation first, and I was a engineer, intelligence analyst, and I taught a database course, and I taught it to people from around the world. Saudis happened to be just one of them. So I also did the same thing with Research Associates of Syracuse, where I taught a database course, same one, because RAS separated from the headquarters, Syracuse Research, formed their own company. And so while there, of course, I was there for a couple of years, and then the business went down the tubes, so I got laid off. Then I was a consultant for a utility company, and I got a call from the president of RAS, said, hey Ron, you want to go to Saudi Arabia? I go, why is that? He says, one of your students requested that they would like to have you come to their country. So, one of their officers that I taught. So I had an interview up in Boston, and the major that interviewed me says, I'd like to have you come in It was January of 1996. So I packed up and moved to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I spent time in Jeddah, Riyadh. I was the consultant to the Royal Saudi Ministry of Defense and Aviation. And the general I worked for wanted me to instruct his people on electronic warfare. So I developed a 6-month course for enlisted and a 4-month course for officers. Once the 6-month course for enlisted was done, I went ahead and taught. He said, well, you got to stay on, you got to teach the course. So I taught the course, made some changes as we went through it. Then they asked me to develop an officer course, 4-month officer course. So I did that. They said, well, you got to stay on, you got to teach it. At the end, it was like 3.5 years in Saudi Arabia. I had access to the whole country.
Did you like it there, living there?
I liked it there. I got to be real good friends with the Saudis. The enlisted people invited me to their village. I'd go down to the village. They would share. They'd have me sample their food, and it treated me like one of the family. You know, one old guy, I think he was 100. Said he was 105.
Wow. He
He had like 100 Kalashnikov rifles. What are you doing with that? But he's come. He says, let's have target practice.
Oh, jeez.
So we're doing some target practice out by his place near the desert, and firing into the desert, cans and stuff like that. And he told me, he says, I'm looking for a bride. I go, and 105. So I kind of chuckled. I had my son with me at that time. He came over to visit us, and I took him with me down to see what there's a difference between the rural Saudi and those that lives, outside the city. And between the city, the urban and the rural. And the rural people were so friendly, especially in the southern part of the country where you have your farming districts. They were really beautiful people. It's amazing. They pray 5 times a day, even in the city. And everything shuts down. Everything shuts down for about 20 minutes or 45 minutes. All the stores close. And after prayer is over, they open back up and continue on. So, but Jeddah is an amazing place to be in. It has so much different roundabouts that have figures on it. The tallest bicycle in the world. There's so many different things. I have pictures of everything in Saudi Arabia. Of some of the statues that they have up there. And it was just my wife loved it there. She liked shopping, of course. All women love shopping, but we had an enjoyable time. 3.5 years, I figured it's time to come back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, during your military career, is there anything that we haven't covered that we should have?
well, let's see. On the Enterprise, I mentioned I was the electronic evaluation officer. So what I did was brief the strike crews on ingress and egress routes, the threat along the ingress and egress routes of their mission. Where the surface air missiles were, where the air defense, where the enemy aircraft were, AAA concentrations. I said, you got to stay above a certain altitude, else AAA. What they tried to do was, they have an air defense site come up with the missiles, and they would have you fly down below the missile envelope, but then the guns, the AAAs would get you. So they had to really watch what they were doing. You just don't dive once a missile site comes up, dive for the floor, because you got to get hit with the 35 millimeter, 57 millimeter guns, or 85 millimeter guns. So it was a tactic that they employed, and our air crews were briefed on all that. I do analytical studies for the carrier division commander as an admiral on trends that I saw happening in Southeast Asia. I also was a emergency action team member, and that's, you've heard of the pop cards. Break those open, find out what our mission was. If it was an exercise, then so indicate. If it was to attack, go to general war, and what our targets were, I'd brief the air crews on what our general war plan was, and what the defense is, how to ingress a target, and how to egress it, what altitudes to send at to get in undetected initially. Once they hit the border, they were detected, but just to get below the enemy's radar horizon. So, and then the other big thing was the bear overflight. I was the bear overflight officer. So I did a report on from the time we first detected the bear coming in to the fleet, notified everybody, and just tracked it all the way down until it left our area of operation. So that was really good.
So what lessons do you draw from your experiences?
What lessons? I know one of the key things is communications and paying attention to the details. I had in DIA, when I was a watch center officer, I had a State Department guy call me up and talk to me about a terrorist activity in Kuala Lumpur. And he said, for the director, eyes only. And I said back to him, he's a State Department, and I'm just a lieutenant. I go, sir, I said, let me remind you, we have a SINCPAC commander, and he has to exercise contingencies. If you leave him out of the picture, I says, you're going to be on the hot seat, because I'm going to tell him that you said for his eyes only, for the director's eyes, and not for him. Something goes wrong, you're on the hot seat. Wow, all right. Go ahead and pass it on to SINCPAC. Well, thank you, sir. But you had stuff like that where in the Intelligence Center, you had access to the entire intelligence network around the world, to all the unified specified commanders, to the White House Situation Room, to CIA, NSA, State, and we all kind of shared the information. If anybody had something to add, then we would go ahead and, they'd tell us amplifying information. I brought I called a conference call to all the people concerned that I just mentioned regarding the May Aguez. I don't remember, May Aguez was a merchant ship that was taken by the Cambodians. President Ford was the president. Ford was the president at the time.
He'd just become after Nixon's resignation. And
that's right. So I convened that conference call and alerted the White House and everybody else concerned as to what was going on and what we were going to do. And the information got around. They passed different types of information as to what our plans were, what we're going to do, what actions we're going to perform. At least everybody in the entire nation was aware of what our response was going to be.
I mean, at the time, it was seen as sort of a testing of Ford and, what his, how he was going to react to a, boarding of something like that.
Yeah, it was one of our own ships that was boarded on the high seas, and they were pulling it into port into Cambodia. So I know when they first called the president, he was in an economic development meeting, and of course the sit room's manned by CIA. So they contacted the president. It probably still is today.
So what was going through your head at the time?
At my time, I was trying to get as much information as I can to see of how we could recover the ship. I had a colonel that was in charge of the Intelligence Center, and we kind of worked the information, wrote up reports, notified everybody, And we just want to do everything we can, that we, all the information we had access to let all the people in a chain of command know what was going on. And of course, Sink Pack, it was in his theater, so he had to make some decisions as to how to take back the ship. So, and they did. So, I got the whole crew back.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any points that we've missed?
No, I think we covered just about everything that I could think of at this point in time. I know my second tour at NSA, it was on a training staff, and my function there was to help Fort Devens out and all the reserve units. And they upgraded the courses at Fort Devens, like $1.2 million worth of contracts. Went ahead and did that, and I got a lot of accommodations, all in the report I have there for you. All that is, everything I said is right in those reports. It's a nice historical document, I would say.
I think so. Any final point you want to make?
Oh, I tell you, I love the military. 20 years, I enjoyed every minute of it. It was so satisfying. I got my education through there. Had 2 years of college when I went in. Went to Monterey, got my BA degree in international relations and foreign affairs. I got my master's degree in business from Central Michigan University while I was in the Army. I mean, the educational opportunities were really great. And I'd be doing this while working, you know, in the service, in the Army or the Navy. So, educational opportunities were great. The assignments were exciting, you know. And one of the things that kind of surprised me, I got to tell you, is when I worked in the command center, the National Military Command Center, the hotline to Moscow. I figured it was a souped up means of communication back and forth. It was a World War II teletype. We gave them a state-of-the-art one, and they gave us this World War II teletype. I go, what? And they go, yeah, this is how we communicate back and forth. We man it 24 hours a day. So that really was a surprise to me. Go, jeez. But that's the way the Russians worked back then. So.
If you don't mind, I need to get a picture of you.
Yeah.
Promise it won't hurt too much.
I brought pictures.